My name is Yvonne. I am 68 years old and my occupation is a retired high school principal. I never thought the hardest lesson I would have to teach my son would be at the cost of his own roof. You spend your entire life building a sanctuary, a place of peace, after the devastating loss of your husband, only to have the foundation cracked by the very people you invited inside. I stood in the shadow of my own home, listening to cold whispers that would shatter our family forever. For years, I have prided myself on my fierce independence. My beautifully maintained suburban home was my absolute pride and joy, a physical testament to the life I built and the grief I survived. But my generosity was mistaken for weakness. 2 years ago, my 35-year-old son, Marcus, and his 32-year-old wife, Chloe, moved into the main house. They swore it was just a temporary arrangement to save for their own place. Because I love my family, I graciously agreed and downsized into the property's attached custom-built mother-in-law suite. I handed them the keys to the large kitchen and the spacious bedrooms, settling into my smaller quarters to help them get ahead. I thought I was giving them a stepping stone to their future. The reality of their greed hit me on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in the shared garden when I overheard their voices drifting through an open window. Chloe was bitterly complaining that my suite was wasted space they could be renting out for profit. Instead of defending me, Marcus agreed, casually suggesting they manipulate me into moving to an assisted living facility so they could take over the entire estate. My heart broke, but my tears quickly dried into a cold resolve. They thought I was just a frail widow they could easily push aside, but they forgot exactly who built this house. When my husband David passed away 20 years ago, my entire world collapsed overnight. I was left alone to raise Marcus, who was just a teenager at the time. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket, but I refused to let it bury my son's future. I made a quiet vow at David's graveside that Marcus would never feel the financial void his father's sudden departure left behind. As a high school principal, my days were already long, but I took on every extra administrative duty I could find. I worked double shifts, ran summer school programs, and tutored late into the evenings. I sacrificed sleep, social gatherings, and personal peace just to ensure there was food on the table and a college fund growing in the bank. I wore the same winter coat for 10 years so he could have the best textbooks and a reliable car for his commute. I poured every ounce of my energy into him. When Marcus graduated from university debt-free, I stood in the crowd with tears streaming down my face, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. I genuinely believed that my unwavering faith in our family had paid off. To me, a mother's love is not just a feeling. It is a tangible, unbreakable safety net. It means standing between your child and the harsh realities of the world, absorbing the blows so they can walk away unscathed. I gave him the best possible start in life, trusting that the foundation of love and sacrifice I built would anchor him forever. I never once questioned if I was giving too much, because in my heart, you can never give a child too much love. I thought he understood the unconditional devotion that fueled my every waking moment. That deep-rooted trust was exactly why I made the most devastating mistake of my life just 6 months ago. The stress of aging caught up with me in a terrifying way. One afternoon, I collapsed in the kitchen, suffering a mild stroke. The physical recovery was slow and frustrating, leaving me temporarily weakened and unable to handle my usual daily tasks. The doctors warned me to avoid all stress and focus entirely on regaining my strength and mobility. For a woman who had spent decades firmly in control of every aspect of her life, the sudden vulnerability was incredibly daunting. I was terrified of falling behind on my bills or mismanaging my medical expenses while my mind and body healed. So, I turned to the one person I believed would protect me, with the same fierce loyalty I had always shown him. I signed over temporary power of attorney to Marcus. I gave him full access to my banking details and my carefully guarded retirement accounts, instructing him to help manage things until I was back on my feet. To me, it was nothing more than a practical family safeguard. It was the logical step to take when you have raised a capable, educated son. I trusted him implicitly without a single shadow of a doubt. I believed that handing him the reins of my financial life was perfectly safe, a temporary bridge over troubled waters. I never imagined that this act of complete vulnerability, this ultimate display of a mother's trust, would become the very weapon he and Chloe would use to try and dismantle my life. I handed over the keys to my kingdom, blindly believing my son would guard the gates, completely unaware that I had just invited the enemy directly inside. The first sign that something was horribly wrong happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had driven down to the local pharmacy to pick up my routine heart medication. It was a simple errand I had done 100 times before. I smiled at the young pharmacist as she handed me the small paper bag. I pulled out my debit card and slid it into the machine, expecting the familiar approved beep. Instead, the screen flashed a bright red declined message. I chuckled nervously, assuming it was a simple bank error, and asked her to run it again. Once more the machine rejected the transaction. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my backup credit card, an account I kept completely clear for emergencies. I swiped it with a trembling hand, praying for a different result. Denied. The loud beep echoed in the quiet store, drawing the attention of the people waiting in line behind me. The pharmacist looked at me with a soft, pitying expression that made my cheeks burn with intense humiliation. I could feel the silent judgment of the strangers watching a well-dressed elderly woman unable to pay for her essential medicine. I muttered a flustered apology, pushed the bag across the counter, and hurried out into the rain. My mind raced with utter confusion. There was plenty of money in my checking account just last week, and my credit card had a zero balance. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. I needed to go home and have Marcus check the online banking portal. Surely this was just a technical glitch that my son could quickly fix. I drove home much faster than usual, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I parked in the driveway and rushed toward the connecting door that linked my mother-in-law's suite to the main house. I planned to walk right into the living room and ask Marcus to pull up the bank statements on his laptop. I turned the handle quietly, stepping onto the hardwood floor of the hallway. But before I could call out his name, I stopped dead in my tracks. Voices drifted from the kitchen, sharp and clear. I recognized them immediately. It was Marcus, his wife Chloe, and my late husband's brother Jerome. I crept closer to the archway, holding my breath as I listened to the conversation. Jerome sounded deeply uneasy. His voice wavered as he asked Marcus if they were pushing things too fast. He told my son that I had always been good to them, and doing this behind my back felt wrong. I waited for Marcus to agree to reassure his uncle that they were looking out for my best interests. Instead, I heard my son let out a short, dismissive smirk. His voice was completely devoid of the warmth I had known for 35 years. He spoke with a chilling authority. "We cut off her money, Uncle Jerome. She is going to that state-run facility in Florida. We need the liquid cash for our kitchen remodel, and she will be out of the suite by next month." The words struck me like physical blows. A state-run facility, a kitchen remodel. Then Chloe chimed in, her voice high and cruel. She actually laughed. She told Jerome to stop worrying, gloating about how I was completely powerless now. She bragged that because I had signed over the power of attorney, there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop them from emptying the accounts and packing my bags. I stood paralyzed in the shadows, listening to the two people I had sheltered laughing about stealing my independence and throwing me away. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate theft. Every sacrifice I had ever made for Marcus was being casually traded for upgraded countertops and a larger living space. A violent trembling overtook my entire body. I leaned heavily against the cool plaster wall to keep myself from collapsing onto the floor. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and my chest seized with an agonizing heartbreak. The pain was far worse than the stroke I had suffered. The boy I had raised, the child I had worked double shifts to protect, viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to be discarded. He did not see a mother who loved him. He saw a bank account to drain and a room to clear out. My first instinct was to burst into the kitchen to scream and cry and demand to know how he could do this to me. But the years of discipline as a high school principal held me firmly in place, confronting them now, while I was completely blindsided and financially locked out, would only give them the upper hand. I slowly backed away from the archway. I retreated through the connecting door, locking it silently behind me. In the quiet safety of my suite, my tears stopped falling. The crushing sorrow rapidly crystallized into cold, hard anger. I did not waste another single moment shedding tears over a son who no longer existed. The Marcus I raised was gone, replaced by a stranger driven by greed. I walked quietly to the heavy wooden door that connected my suite to the main house. I turned the deadbolt, the solid click echoing in the small hallway. They were locked out of my space, and now I was going to lock them out of my life. Decades spent as a high school principal had taught me how to handle insubordination and how to build an airtight case. You never confront a problem without undeniable proof. I moved to my bedroom closet and pulled down a small lockbox hidden on the top shelf. Inside was an older secondary laptop that Marcus and Chloe knew nothing about. It was the machine I used for personal writing, completely disconnected from the shared home network they monitored. I powered it on and connected to a secure mobile hotspot. My hands were perfectly steady now. The panic had been entirely replaced by a clinical, devastating focus. I logged into my financial portals, bypassing the main dashboard and digging straight into the transaction histories. The evidence was glaringly obvious. Large sums of cash had been systematically transferred out of my retirement accounts and funneled directly into an external joint checking account under their names. The money I had saved for my twilight years was bleeding dry to fund their vanity projects. I meticulously downloaded every single bank statement, capturing the exact amounts and the unauthorized transfer routing numbers. I took screenshots of the digital signatures and recorded the precise timestamps of every illicit transaction. I organized the files into a secure digital folder and backed everything up to a physical flash drive. I was building a fortress of paper and data, a wall of evidence they could never climb over. They thought they had outsmarted a frail old woman, But they had merely awakened a seasoned administrator who knew exactly how to document a betrayal. The following morning, I waited until I heard the heavy garage door close, signaling that Marcus and Chloe had left for work. I quietly slipped out of my suite, got into my car, and drove directly to downtown. I had an urgent appointment with Jamal, my longtime estate attorney, and a trusted friend who had helped my late husband and me draft our original wills. Sitting across from Jamal in his wood-paneled office, I laid the flash drive on his desk and explained everything I had overheard and discovered. He listened in stunned silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to deep professional outrage as he reviewed the banking documents. Marcus and his wife made a fatal miscalculation, Jamal said, folding his hands on the desk. They assumed that holding a temporary power of attorney essentially gave them ownership of your estate, or that the property would naturally default to them because Marcus is your only heir. They thought they could simply drain the liquid assets and ship you off to Florida, but they completely forgot about the structure we put in place 10 years ago. A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in days. Jamal pulled a thick, heavy binder from his filing cabinet and opened it to a section marked with a red tab. The ironclad, irrevocable living trust. When David passed away, I had placed the house, the land, and the entire estate directly into the trust. The house did not belong to me as an individual, and it certainly did not belong to Marcus. It belonged exclusively to the trust, and I remained the sole undisputed trustee with absolute authority over the property assets. A power of attorney cannot override the terms of an irrevocable living trust. But the revelation did not stop there. Jamal turned to another page, producing a document I had insisted they sign 2 years ago. It was a temporary occupancy agreement. At the time, Marcus had laughed it off as an unnecessary formality, but I had required it as a condition of them moving into the main house. The contract clearly stipulated that they were granted temporary residence in exchange for covering all monthly property taxes and utility payments. Jamal pointed to the recent bank statements. By draining my accounts to pay for their lifestyle, they had deliberately ceased paying the utilities from their own income, actively shifting the financial burden back onto me. They had fundamentally breached the occupancy agreement. They were no longer my guests. Legally speaking, they were now hostile tenants, in default squatting in a property they had no legal right to alter or control. The trap they thought they had set for me was actually closing around their own ankles. We wasted no time dismantling the false empire my son had tried to build. Right there in Jamal's office, we executed the legal paperwork to immediately revoke the temporary power of attorney. Jamal placed a direct call to the senior fraud investigator at my primary bank. Within 20 minutes, every single account was locked down. Marcus was completely frozen out. He could not withdraw a dime, transfer a penny, or even view a balance. We formally filed felony fraud charges regarding the unauthorized transfers, triggering an immediate freeze on the stolen funds sitting in their joint account. The money they had earmarked for their luxury kitchen remodel was now locked securely in a banking vault, completely inaccessible pending a federal fraud investigation. But simply securing my finances was not enough. I needed to excise the infection from my home. I looked at Jamal and told him I wanted them out of my house immediately. Jamal nodded his pen, moving swiftly across legal parchment. He drafted a strict, legally binding 3-day notice to quit. It was a formal eviction notice, citing their blatant violation of the temporary occupancy agreement and demanding they vacate the premises within 72 hours or face immediate removal by local law enforcement. There would be no second chances, no tearful negotiations, and absolutely no family mediation. They had drawn the battle lines the moment they planned to ship me to a state-run facility. I took the freshly printed eviction notice from Jamal, feeling the crisp weight of the paper in my hands. It was the most empowering document I had ever held. I thanked my attorney, walked out into the bright afternoon sun, and drove back to my suburban sanctuary. I parked my car, walked up the familiar stone path to the main house, and unlocked the front door. I stood in the center of the foyer, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. They had planned to gut with my money. I placed the eviction notice squarely in the center of the granite kitchen island, right where they would see it the moment they walked through the door. Then I retreated to my suite, locked the connecting door one final time, and waited for them to come home. I sent a brief, simple text message to Marcus, asking both him and Chloe to come over to my suite for a family meeting as soon as they arrived home from work. Promptly at 6 o'clock, a heavy, confident knock echoed through my living room. I opened the door to find them standing on my porch, radiating an air of unbearable smugness. They walked into my home with their shoulders squared and their heads held high, completely convinced they had finally cornered me. I could see the poorly concealed gleam of triumph in my son's eyes. They had undoubtedly checked the joint bank account, seen the massive balance of stolen funds, and assumed the declined debit card at the pharmacy had finally broken my spirit. They sat down on my velvet sofa, exchanging a brief, knowing glance that made my stomach churn. Chloe even had the audacity to cross her legs and ask me if I needed help paying for my groceries this week, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. They were fully prepared for me to cry, to beg for access to my own money, and to surrender whatever dignity I had left. They expected a terrified, frail, elderly woman pleading for a crumb of mercy. Instead, I poured myself a cup of hot tea, sat down in my armchair directly across from them, and looked my son dead in the eye. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or offer any explanation for the meeting. The silence in the room stretched out thick and heavy, until their confident smiles began to falter under my unwavering gaze. With slow, deliberate precision, I reached onto the coffee table and picked up a thick, heavy manila envelope. I placed it on the glass surface between us and calmly slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Marcus. Marcus picked up the envelope with a dismissive scoff, tearing open the flap. He pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. I watched his face closely as he read the bold letterhead on the very first page. His arrogant smirk instantly vanished completely, replaced by a pale, breathless terror. He was staring directly at the formal notice of a federal bank fraud investigation. Beneath that lay the officially stamped revocation of his temporary power of attorney, and finally the rigid 3-day eviction notice drafted by my attorney. His hands began to visibly shake, the papers rattling in his grip. He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Chloe snatched the documents from his hands, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. Within seconds, her face turned a mottled red, and she started screaming. She wildly claimed that they owned the property, now insisting that the house belonged to them because Marcus was the sole heir. I stood up tall, straightening my posture, and looked down at the two thieves sitting on my sofa. I spoke with a calm, icy authority, that filled the entire room. You took my money, Marcus, but you forgot whose name is actually on the deed. The property belongs to the trust, and I am the sole trustee. You have exactly 72 hours to vacate my property, pack your bags, and hand over the keys before the county sheriff removes you both for criminal trespassing. Fast forward exactly 3 weeks, and the silence in my home is finally peaceful again. Marcus and Chloe were forced to hastily pack their belongings into rented trucks under the watchful eyes of local law enforcement. They are now living in a cramped, dark apartment on the other side of town. The ongoing felony fraud investigation has completely ruined their credit, effectively destroying any chance they had of buying a house of their own. As for me, I immediately changed every single lock on the property and fully reclaimed my financial independence. The main house did not stay empty for long. I rented it out to a lovely young family who respects the space and pays their rent on time every single month. I used the security deposit and the first month of rental income to book a luxury cruise through the Mediterranean, something I had dreamed of doing since David passed away. I survived the ultimate betrayal by the one person I trusted most, and I emerged stronger than ever. The heavy burden of raising a selfish son has finally been lifted from my shoulders. I am safe, I am secure, and most importantly, I am entirely free. I learned a painful truth that I hope you never have to experience. A mother's love is unconditional, and it always should be, but a mother's resources should never be unprotected. We pour our entire souls into our children, hoping they will eventually honor our lifelong sacrifices. Yet no matter how deeply you love your family, you must always protect your own foundation first. You can be endlessly generous and you can be kind, but never hand over the keys to your kingdom while you are still sitting on the throne. Your independence is a fundamental right, not a convenient privilege for others to simply steal. Have you or someone you know ever had to set a hard boundary with an ungrateful family member? It is never an easy decision to make, but sometimes it is the only way to survive. Please let me know your personal experiences in the comments below, because sharing our truth makes us all stronger. And please, tell me what city you are watching from today, and exactly how long you have been following her golden years stories. Your continuous support means the absolute world to me. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a lesson.